So welcome to our discussion about Pioneer, the HDR UK hub in acute care. Next slide, please. We have an agenda lined up and we're going to try and stick to our timings. So just a warning to the other speakers as well, if they go over, we will be asking them to wind up. But I'm going to start with a welcome and overview, and then I'm going to pass to Susie Gallier, who's sitting beside me, for a technical overview as our Technical Director of Pioneer. We'll be talking you through some case studies so you can see the kind of work that we've been involved in, and then passing over to Laura and Gary. Laura's our professional and Gary's our lay patient lead to talk about our public oversight of data access, and then some questions and answers as well. And as you can see on the bottom of the slide, you can send in questions via the chat function, or if you want to be anonymous because your name will be on your chat, you can email them to us at pioneer@uhb.nhs.uk. And there, Ben, who's our project officer, will be watching that email, and as questions come through, if they come through in that format, he'll be putting them on the chat so that you can see them. Next slide, please. So, an introduction to where we've come from. Next slide, please. So Pioneer is the hub in acute care, and acute care is somewhat of a new offer for people to think about. It moves away from the standard disease definitions in terms of a single condition or an organ-based system, and really looks at an area of healthcare provision. So acute care is any unplanned healthcare episode, and it's a huge area and a huge challenge and burden for the NHS, but also globally. In England alone, there are 110 million urgent same-day patient contacts, and the numbers have been going up and up. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the burden that this can place on the NHS, with other services grinding to a halt over the last year, as the NHS has come together to try and look after patients with COVID-19. Even without COVID, there are known health inequalities in the area of acute care. If you come from a poorer background, or if you come from a non-white background, you are more likely to rely on the emergency department of hospitals for all of your healthcare needs, rather than going through elective or planned care, including screening for common diseases. And the increased demand for emergency services places a huge impact on the rest of the NHS. At the moment, most hospitals across the country are facing a huge surge in non-COVID unplanned healthcare admissions, and this has meant that many elective procedures, planned operations, planned treatments have had to be paused to meet that demand. When you think about what's coming through the front door of the hospital, chronic disease accounts for 2/3 of emergency medical admissions, and 10% of all acute presentations are the new diagnosis of a chronic illness, but at a late stage. But this area of healthcare has seen less innovation and research than many others, and that's because it's a really complex care environment that spans healthcare organisations, primary care, out-of-hours care delivery, helplines, ambulances, hospitals, and community care. Next slide, please. So Pioneer came together to try and tackle care in this area so that we could provide real benefits for patients. Our aims are to improve the care provided in acute settings and to reduce the reliance on acute services by understanding acute illnesses, what causes it to flare up, and what the long-term outcomes and consequences of acute illness can be. So in a nutshell, and we'll be going through this in a little bit more detail, Pioneer is an ethically and CAG-approved secure research database and analytic environment. It's a private cloud-based system using Microsoft Azure, which has been cybersecurity tested. And using that, we can build bespoke trusted research environments where we can place patient data, anonymized patient data, so that it can be used to improve patient care. We link patient data at an individual level across community and hospital healthcare providers. And we make that data accessible to researchers, but always with the North Star to improve patient care, so that we can show that data access has led to tangible benefits that patients will feel on the ground. And we have a rigorous transparent and public oversight process for data sharing through our Data Trust Committee, which Gary and Laura will speak to you about later. And we can provide data access under license to NHS, academic, commercial, policy, and the charitable sector. Next slide, please. This is a timeline for what's happened since we started. And unlike most academic projects, we've really had to run at this in order to make sure that we are able to help patients as soon as possible through this transparent and governance access to data. So in November 2019, our investment landed. And then from November 19 to March, we then began project setup. And actually what we spent a considerable amount of time doing was talking to patients and the public about what they'd expect from Pioneer in terms of how we would curate data and what processes would govern access, but also to researchers about the kind of data that they needed, what barriers they felt to accessing data, and how they could best use data to improve patient care. In March 2020, I probably don't need to tell this audience, we were slightly distracted by the COVID pandemic landing at our door. And so we really pivoted with partners, including an academic collaboration called Decoded, which I'll be speaking to you about later, but in order to try and help the NHS and our patients meet this unprecedented demand. September to December saw us really starting to run with Pioneer in terms of completing our platform build, starting to get data sets available and made ready, and starting to work with researchers to enable that data to lead to patient improvements. And we've carried on through this process, working with ever more complex data, starting with structured data that might be routinely available in healthcare records, to working with unstructured data such as images. In March, we had our milestone review with HDR UK, who wanted to make sure that we'd met all of our criteria for funding. And I'm pleased to say that Pioneer passed through that with gold stars. And our focus now is trying to understand what more we could do to improve patient care at the front door of hospitals and unplanned healthcare contacts in community services more effectively. Next slide, please. Working with researchers, we've discussed and now built up an offer in terms of what people would want and expect from us. And sometimes it is about being provided access to data with careful governance and patient and public oversight. But actually, data itself is not the only answer. And to make the best use of the data, we also offer consultancy as well. And that means being able to talk to technical experts such as Susie, but also working with clinicians and patient groups to try and understand how that data can lead to those really important benefits to patient care. And we also offer community membership, meaning that we invite people to get involved with Pioneer so that they can help shape the kind of work that we do, the kind of data that we're working on, and the kind of projects that we're supporting. Next slide, please. Working with HDR UK, we show some of the data that's available via the gateway, the HDR UK Gateway. And if you put Pioneer into that, you'll see a number of data sets listed as shown on this slide. This is ever expanding, but it should be seen really as a taster as the kind of data that we have. And if you skim through this list in the short amount of time you've got, you can see that it covers a really broad array of clinical areas, from maternity care to COVID responses to rare cardiomyopathies. So all of this can be encompassed because, of course, the front door of the hospital is disease inclusive. It doesn't matter if you've broken your leg or you have a flare-up of a chronic disease, you still come in through an unplanned healthcare contact. And it's ageless as well, meaning that we also access data for children so that we can crucially improve healthcare for children as well. Next slide, please. We try and show this data in a way that might be useful to researchers and to the public to see the kind of data that we hold via infographics. And these are 3 infographics that you'll find available on our website of many more. Next slide, please. But as I said, this should be seen as a taster. The kind of data that we hold is really vast in terms of both its breadth and depth. We're condition and disease inclusive. We focus on the patient in their entirety without a disease or organ-based approach. And we can not only look at the event that led a person to ask for acute services, but also what happened to them before and what happened to them afterwards to understand what led to that acute care contact and what its consequences were. We're ageless, as I said. And because we're based in Birmingham, we're inclusive of a very diverse population, not only in terms of ethnicity, with 42% of our population being non-white, but also in terms of socioeconomic status. Our current data very much focuses on secondary care and the ambulance service within the West Midlands, with primary care records joining us shortly. Next slide, please. And this slide, which hopefully you'll get to look at if you request the slides, which you can do so through the Pioneer, the Pioneer website by asking to be part of our leaflets, will show you the kind of data that we've got. And as you can see, we're dealing with more than 30 million diagnostic codes, more than 3 million procedures, more than 249 million observations. The numbers start to be staggering. But when you think about those as part of a linked journey for an individual patient, we have approximately 1.2 million patients data per year joining us. Next slide, please. And this is just a taster to talk about the kind of progress that we've made so far. We'll be looking at some of these case studies in more detail. But we've been working across a number of different sectors to support our projects with that focus on patient benefit, including working with the Office of National Statistics, SAGE, and NHS England, but also academic collaborations with data shared now with more than 180 researchers, and with the NHS, helping NHS colleagues learn how to look after their patients more, and providing evidence of output, not just through academic publications, but also through policy documents and public-facing documents. Next slide, please. And I'm now going to pass over to Susie, who will talk you through the technical side of Pioneer.
Thank you, Liz. And good to meet everyone, and very pleased to see you all here today. So as Liz says, I'm the technical director of Pioneer, and I have the job of taking you through what is the most complicated platform setup in a way that hopefully will be accessible to you all. So apologies if there's anything too technical, but I've tried to keep that lay. And also Liz was well on time, so I've now got no pressure at all. Next slide, please. So when we started, we actually worked with Insono, who are Microsoft Platinum partners. And really, it has been a joint journey together of learning and discovery from our side, our knowledge and expertise of our clinical environment and data, and really Insono bringing that real high level of expertise. But the way projects have always worked with ourselves, and Pioneer's sort of mantra is always to think big, but start small. And actually that has seen us well, because it means that actually we know what our end goal is, we know what the direction of travel for Pioneer is, and we have a very large strategic vision. But it means that what we can do is we can start and cut that up very small. And we normally work in what's called a minimum viable product, so that we actually sort of start to do things in about 6 weeks. But each week we look at sort of a couple of weeks turnaround. And the reason to do that is actually it means we can actually sort of make sure that we're feeding that back. It's incremental, we can learn, we can fail fast. And actually all of that is failed in a secure, safe environment. So we never risk any patient data. This is always done with fake data. We never risk that, but it always means that even in terms of when you build stuff, we can actually test it very quick. And more importantly, we get that sort of public engagement. We have clinicians like Liz and her colleagues who can feed back to say the data is looking like we expect. So all of that means that we can innovate, and that is absolutely critical for us, because at the heart of all this, as Liz said, is that we want to bring that innovation back to patient care. But it means that we can innovate in technology, and we can then help others, and our sort of people who access that data can actually then be innovative as well. And all of that works with a continuous service, the operational sort of support that goes with that. And that means all of our products are then sort of cutting edge, market leading platforms, which is actually really important to us, because we are working with some really cutting edge technologies and people like Microsoft that Liz will talk to. And if we don't have that cutting edge technology, we won't be able to drive that innovation. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, if you just actually click them through, because I think otherwise it will be brilliant. So at the start of this, we have our data sources, and at the far extreme right, I think it's the one more click, we actually have our users. And the key bit for us is that actually we take our structured, semi-structured data, and we actually then, through our integration, store and process, bring that to our users, customers, whether that's academic, whether it's clinical, commercial, but that is then done on a license basis, and we can provide that in a very secure environment. This is a highly technical diagram, but it does hopefully show that we have all of this amazing data, as Liz has already touched on. But the key bit is that unless we can actually process that in a very secure way using all of these key technologies and software that's available to us, we then are able to provide that analytics at the other side. But for those of you that are in the audience who are technical, you'll recognize that we're using that sort of SQL integration, data factory, and from a security perspective, we have that firewall there, and we're able to facilitate things like machine learning and data visualizations through sort of Power BI. But if anyone wants to talk to me more technically afterwards, then do get in touch. I won't go further than that. Next slide, please. So again, I just wanted to very quickly touch on, and although I appreciate you can't actually zoom into the slides once you get them, you can. But the key bit here is that the way the team have worked is that we've all got sort of years and years of knowledge of our healthcare data, and that serves us incredibly well for Pioneer, because what it means is we understand how our data works. And so in the green at the top, you can see that what we do is we have a dimension, and we set those dimensions up. Maybe that's time, maybe that's a diagnosis. And within that, all of those then have fact relationships. And this is really important to us, because what that means is that we can make all of those linkages, because as Liz said, we are talking about millions and millions of rows of data. So unless this team are working very technically to set this up really well, we won't be able to link it correctly. And the longitudinal accuracy is absolutely pivotal for what Pioneer does. So all of that is laid out in a matrix, which means that not only can we actually update that very readily, but it also means that when our users come to look at this data under license, it means it makes it very easy for them to actually use that and understand what we're doing. In terms of data models, we're actually quite diverse. So we have our own local data model, because we've built our own electronic health system, and we use the sort of standard diagnoses codes that are sort of national and international standards. So SNOMED, ICD-10, which is a disease, a way of labeling a disease, and OPCS is the way you label procedures. And we also use OMOP, which is a common sort of data model that's set up internationally to enable us to sort of do more open data science and research, where we're sharing our sort of ability to write code. It's not the data, but it's the code behind that. So it's really important to us to learn and be standard across all our platforms. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've touched briefly on that sort of non-structured data. It goes into a very secure research environment, and each customer has their own research environment. And the tooling there, again, very happy to talk to this if anyone's interested, but we pick up on all of the sort of users that we have. So whether you're an academic and need Julia, RStudio, or whether we actually need to use more machine learning tools, but all of this is actually available. We have standard offerings, and then we can tailor that to any need, and really to very, very advanced machine learning AI. So that's all there, but it's everything, as Liz said earlier, has been securely tested by some really extreme testers. So they normally test GCHQ. So we've allowed them in to test, and they didn't report any problems. So I'm very happy with that. Next slide, please. Okay, and so the steps to access, which is clearly what I hope everyone after this is keen to sort of look at and do. So we have a form on our website, and that then comes to a review panel, and we then take that to our data trust committee. There are commercials and contracts that we have to go through, and finally access. Now that is a very high level summary of an awful lot of work with an awful lot of people. So next slide will show you in a bit more detail. Again, if we can move, yep. And so you can see that what we're saying is that really within sort of week one, where you make that application, that could be as an email, that could be filling in our form, you will then have the opportunity to have that sort of, as Liz said, engagement with the team who understand the data or who understand the academic side of the request. So we're always there to sort of try and help you through to make sure that you get the most out of this data, and we'll make sure that we feed back to make sure that your sort of journey through that, we have a business manager who will keep you updated, but also we'll make sure that from the data perspective, you've got the right level of data, you've got the right depth of data and the right sort of fields that you'll need. But all of that takes up to sort of about 10 to 12 weeks, which when you compare to other sort of data requests is actually quite swift. So we're very proud of that, and we try to make sure we adhere to that.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So we've spoken a little bit about how what the outline for Pioneer was, how we got going, what the process is. But I think it's really important to highlight some of the work that's been done with the health data that we've curated, because I think hopefully that will whet your appetite and enthusiasm for thinking about ways this data can be used to improve patient care further, and also to reassure you about the transparency of process, which Gary and Laura will be talking about after these case studies. So next slide, please. So with that cough from Susie, we'll talk about COVID. The first series of case studies I wanted to share with you is about COVID. Obviously, at the beginning of last year, we had a significant healthcare challenge across the UK and indeed globally. And I'm a frontline clinician by trade. I work in the admissions department, in the emergency department. And I can't tell you how unsettling it was to be faced with an illness where we really had no roadmap in terms of how to look after patients. We didn't know who was going to deteriorate, who was going to improve, what treatments might work. Initially, there was no information on this, who should go to intensive care, and sadly, who was likely to die. And so Pioneer pivoted to try and provide data and structures for clinicians within this area. So you can see at the slide as you're looking at it that there is a cumulative summary report, and this is something that Pioneer put up very quickly. As you can see, it first came to fruition on the 4th of March, so really at the beginning of the pandemic. And we were able to use this across 4 hospitals in Birmingham to look at patients that were coming in with COVID symptoms, who then had a COVID swab, break them down by demographics in terms of their age, use that data to try and understand which patients might be at risk, and map their admissions and subsequent outcomes to understand the kind of side effects or complications that people might have from COVID. If you cast your mind back to March 2020, you'll remember that we were at a time when there was no community testing for COVID. So we knew when people had COVID if they presented to hospital, but we had absolutely no idea what was happening across our population for patients that didn't come into hospital. So you can see a geographical distribution of positive cases, a heat map, if you will, which we were able to share with Public Health England on a daily basis to show them where outbreaks were occurring based on patients' postcodes. And we're able to highlight at a very early stage some of the care homes that were being affected. This meant that Birmingham was able to mount a very important response, which was if we were sending people home from hospital in a time when it took up to 2 weeks to get a COVID test result back, we were able to send them home not just with drug TTOs, we call them, but with PPE TTOs as well, with all of the protection that both the patient and staff would need to look after that patient if they were going home with an uncertain diagnosis as to whether it was COVID or not. We were also able to use this data to plan care needs in real time, and we built a COVID-specific clinical clerking sheet. A clerking sheet is what us doctors use if you come into hospital, almost like a checklist of the kind of symptoms you might have and the information we need to collect. So we're able to embed this, so our COVID clerking became structured, which meant that we could analyze it on a daily basis. And we were also able to use that to put in support tools for clinicians. Many people that were diverted to working at the front door of hospitals had either retired or perhaps were working in areas of healthcare where they hadn't been involved in front door emergency department care provision for many years. And this was a very new and sometimes quite terrifying environment. So we were able to provide information about how you would rank the severity of COVID, who should be then referred up for intensive care, and how we could use treatments to try and support clinicians in new areas. Next slide, please. But of course, the impact that we wanted to have for NHS, although COVID has been hugely important, goes wider than that. As I said in my first few slides, even before COVID, and certainly now as we're hopefully coming to what looks like perhaps the end of COVID, if there isn't a wave 3, I have all my fingers and toes crossed, is how we can care for our patients that don't have COVID and how we can improve care in this really critically challenged healthcare sector. So Pioneer, working with other researchers, has been embarking on a number of different projects, but I wanted to talk to you about 3 in particular. The first was about safer prescribing. So some of the medications that you use at the front door of the hospital are really complicated, and one of them is N-acetylcysteine, which is used for paracetamol overdoses. And when somebody takes an overdose of paracetamol, you need to give them the appropriate amount of treatment, which will essentially mop up the toxic effects of the paracetamol. And you do that by prescribing a medicine over 3 bags of fluid, each in a different volume, each with a different amount, and each that has to be given over a different time. And unfortunately, many people take overdoses in the early hours of the morning, which means often people are doing this over a night shift when perhaps they're already feeling somewhat tired. So it's an area that globally there's significant mistakes in. We were able to generate a very simple algorithm that automatically calculated the appropriate N-acetylcysteine dosing regime based on a patient's weight and their renal function, and mean that all a clinician had to do was write in that they wanted to prescribe N-acetylcysteine. Is this for a paracetamol overdose? Yes, and it automatically provided a prompt to tell them what to prescribe. So it didn't prescribe it for them, it provided that prompt to assist them. And that's taken the error rate of drug prescriptions down from about between 25 and 40% to 0. We've also looked at how we can use medical alerts in the hospital. There are a number of scoring systems that you can use to try and help identify patients at risk of deteriorating who might need to have an urgent medical review or be considered for intensive care. And there are scoring systems that can be used, but if they're used inappropriately, they can redirect resource from patients that don't really need them away from patients that really do. So we've been working consistently with a number of hospitals about how we can improve hospital alerting systems to make sure that people get the care that they need when they need them. And also we've been looking at how guidelines are implemented across the NHS. So at the moment, every acute hospital has to report the percentage of patients that have an assessment for their risk of a blood clot, a VTE. And as long as you do the assessment, that's fine, the reporting ends there. It doesn't matter whether you actually convert that assessment into appropriate prescribing for patients. And the most important thing about any form of risk assessment is not just that it's been done, but has it then followed through to the correct outcome, either drugs prescribed to stop the risk of somebody getting a clot or not prescribed if they're not needed. So we've been working on a series of interventions to try and improve full VTE guideline compliance, not just the assessment, but the appropriate action as well, and have shown that we've been able to consistently maximize patient safety by making sure prescribing occurred appropriately. Next slide, please. That's the kind of work that we've done in terms of our our NHS colleagues, but working with academic colleagues is also really important, because our academic researchers have the ability to bring their academic credibility and training to help answer clinical questions. So Pioneer is very proud that we've been involved in a number of grants that have now secured over £40 million of funding from different prestigious funders, such as the European Research Development Fund, EPSRC, the NIHR, the Wellcome Trust, and MRC. And these grants have been distributed across the breadth of the country to support academic work from Scotland right down to Southampton. And we hope that this will continue to support academic research across the breadth of the UK moving forward. The first academic collaboration that we worked on as Pioneer was Decovid. Decovid is a collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute, with UCL, UCLH, the University of Birmingham, and UHB, University Hospitals Birmingham NHS Trust. And the idea of this was to bring together COVID-related patient data from UCLH and from Birmingham, so hospitals and areas that were hard hit by COVID, to convert it into a standardized language, OMOP, that Susie's spoken about, and then make this accessible to researchers who are affiliated with the Alan Turing Institute so that they could use this to provide insights for patients to try and improve healthcare. There's been a lot of learnings from being involved in this collaboration about being very clear in terms of remit, in terms of starting small and building up and making sure that every element of the programme comes into play at the right time. But this is yielding huge benefits, and indeed the last tranche of data, which I think is from the last wave leading up to March, is already on the UCL platform, which is being used for this, ready for sharing with our analysts. Next slide, please. Another grant that we're very proud to be associated with, out of a number of them, is the admissions grant. This is a grant that is based in Newcastle, but with collaborators based in Dundee, in UCL, Manchester and Birmingham, trying to understand the impact of multimorbidity in hospitalised patients. So multimorbidity is where a patient has more than one chronic health condition that's affecting them. And at the moment, the health service isn't well set up to look after people with complex health needs because they've got multiple chronic conditions. Most of the guidelines that we use deal with one condition and a series of drugs to treat that condition, not really thinking about the patient in their entirety and how that one or two drugs can have huge impact on the other health conditions that people might have. And perhaps a patient coming in with a lung condition, heart disease, poorly controlled diabetes, and maybe an infection needs a group of healthcare professionals to look after them that are trained in looking after patients with multimorbidity rather than a single disease focus. And admission has been specifically set up to do that, to try and understand the impact of complex healthcare needs in people with multiple healthcare conditions when they first present to hospital. Next slide, please. So that's talking to you about some of the academic and NHS collaborations that we've done. But as I also alluded to in the opening slides, we also very much want to work with commercial organisations, recognising that they bring a huge amount of benefit to our patients and also to the UK's economy. There are over 4,000 health tech companies in the UK, and the vast majority of them are small to medium-sized enterprises with a huge national turnover. But forgetting the money, the most important thing about these companies is that they can agilely respond to patient needs on the ground, which can change very rapidly, and help provide care solutions which enable our patients to be looked after better and to look after themselves better as well. We think about SMEs as one block, but actually it's a huge diverse span of companies, some really only starting out, some actually quite large companies that have been well established and are moving forward. So Pioneer has written an SME playbook, which really speaks to the kind of support that Pioneer can give to SMEs at different stages as they grow, but also the offer that's there nationally to support these. And we're really proud to work with Demand Hub, the Data-Enabled Medical Technologies and Devices Hub, which is an ERDF supported programme for SMEs based in the Black Country, Greater Birmingham, Solihull and Coventry. But two examples of the kind of work we're doing. The first, and you'll appreciate that the names aren't there and the cases are a little woolly because these are commercially sensitive, but the first is working with an SME who are really just starting and want to enter the market with an AI-based model that will help predict admission and length of stay. And in this, Pioneer assisting the SME in really understanding the funding routes that might be available to get this kind of work going, the regulatory climate that they're entering into, and the data needed to test their model. You often assume that organisations, researchers will know the data that they need to answer a question, but that's not always the case. And sometimes people have an idea of the kind of data that might be useful, but they might miss some critical factors that they need, or alternatively, they may be asking for far more than they actually need. Pioneer works on a principle of data minimization, which means that you have access, as long as our Data Trust Committee approve, you have access to the data you need to answer the question, but you don't have access to everything. It's not a free-for-all within a patient record, an anonymized patient record. It's very much focused on the data that's needed to answer a question to improve patient care. And so we've been working with this SME to help them understand the kind of data that they need through clinical support and also through analytics and AI support. The second case example I wanted to give you is us working with an SME who've already created an AI suite for images to look for factors which might delay recovery in patients when they're admitted to hospital. They've already gained some initial funding, they've done some validation work, and are now seeking a larger set of images to test and refine their model. And what Pioneer can bring to that is, of course, a huge suite of images that are available, but also the ability to test what they thought they knew through their origin algorithm by throwing at it patients that are different, perhaps, than the patients that they've had access to originally. And if patients have gone to standard biobanks, they generally have data which is very representative of white, often middle class patients. And although that's very important, it doesn't always reflect the diversity that we benefit from across the UK. So Pioneer can match that with different types of patients' images to see whether or not their model still holds through and to see how their algorithm can be refined. Next slide, please. SMEs, of course, can be a really interesting and challenging area to work with, because often these companies don't have the funding or the expertise in-house to help deliver the projects that they're interested in. And you would think that that might be very different if you're working with large commercial healthcare companies. But actually, again, although it's bracketed in one place, commercial healthcare companies often have very different needs, with some of them having the ability to provide their own analytics and their own researchers, some of them needing a lot of support in trying to understand how to answer a question that they're interested in or the data that they may utilize. And large commercial organizations obviously are very diverse. So we have two case studies again to discuss with you. The first is working with Microsoft with the Inner Eye project, with Pioneer and UHB, University Hospitals Birmingham, to enable de-identified medical images and clinical data to be analysed using artificial intelligence techniques. The hope for this is that you would be able to spot patterns in patients' presentations that might give an indication of those most at risk for decline, or to enable rapid diagnosis of conditions which might be masked or might be missed because of the complexity of patients as they present. A clinical example might be that it would be very easy to diagnose a COVID pneumonitis, inflammation of the lungs caused by COVID, if you were otherwise young, fit and well and had a normal chest X-ray. If you have heart failure and you have fluid on the lungs, or if you've had some lung surgery and your lungs look a little different, or you've got a chronic lung disease, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, it then becomes a lot more complicated because your baseline chest image doesn't look normal. And what AI can be very good at is helping look at patterns with clinical data to pull that information out, meaning that you can have rapid diagnostics performed to give those healthcare clinicians on the front door that prompt they might need to think about different diagnoses or to recognize signals when a patient might go downhill. Another case study that we're doing is we're working with a large global pharma company to provide clinical and data science expertise to create a machine learning algorithm that can be used to identify patients at risk of certain disease at a much earlier stage. This is of huge importance. We know that many chronic diseases are associated with significant diagnostic delay, meaning that patients are often not diagnosed until a much later point in their disease history, sometimes meaning that the condition they have is less amenable to treatment and doesn't respond as well as it would have done if patients had been diagnosed earlier. And often some of the problems around this is that patients can go to multiple healthcare settings for a consultation about specific symptoms, or for a test, or for an image, or for a procedure. And if that data isn't brought together in a meaningful way, patterns which point to a diagnosis can be missed. So this company is very interested in seeing if we can make diagnoses earlier, using routinely collected health data from different settings to bring it together to provide that healthcare prompt so that clinicians can think about doing the diagnostic test that might unlock the answers as to what has been happening for those patients. And these are some of the examples of the work that we've been doing, but they also vary in terms of the other kind of projects that we're supporting with. And this includes feasibility screening for clinical trials. So if you change the age range, what kind of population does that include or exclude? If you exclude people based on a certain list of comorbidities, how reflective is your likely included population to be against the backdrop of the whole population of people that suffer with that condition? That's very important, as we know that most clinical trials only represent about 7% of people that actually have the condition. That means the evidence that we're using to treat patients might not be applicable to the vast proportion of patients under our care. We're also able to use the data to look for adverse events with novel or comparative treatments, and to compare what treatments patients are actually getting versus the guidelines that they should be getting in theory. And to try and help with this, we have built an industry and medical technology playbook, which outlines the kind of support that Pioneer can give to try and look after patients better by using the data that we hold within Pioneer. And now it gives me great pleasure to move on to the next part of our talk, which will move into our patient voice and our public oversight of data. And for this, I'll hand over to Laura and then Gary.
Thank you very much, Liz. So I'm Laura Forty. I'm the Patient and Public Involvement and Engagement Lead for Pioneer. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about public voice, how and why we listen to public voice and integrate it into our processes, and why it's so important to our ethos at Pioneer. And then I will introduce to you Gary Price, who is lead patient and public representative who's been working with Pioneer right from the outset. So next slide, please. So right from day one with Pioneer, we have been reaching out to patients and members of the public, listening to what they think about how health data is used in research, and understanding their attitudes towards using health data in research, any concerns that they may have, where their willingness lies, basically just understanding more about what they think so that we can ensure that we're acting in line with what the public are comfortable with, what they approve of, and what they see would be beneficial to patients. So this is really important, since we use patient data, real patient data in our work, that we have public trust and public backing for the activities that we undertake. So we did some work, Liz mentioned, in our project setup stage. So right in the early months of Pioneer, we carried out some survey work, which was conducted in the foyer of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. Primarily, I think we did use other places to gather information as well. But we were talking to patients, to their family members who may have been visiting, and friends who may have been visiting or attending hospital appointments with them, hospital volunteers, as well as healthcare professionals. So we got a good kind of cross section of society, really, by having those surveys in that setting. And we asked about what they knew about how health data was being used at the moment, what they understood about how it could be used for research, who could use it for research, what they would be willing or comfortable with in terms of their own data, patient data being used for research, and where they had more questions or concerns. Off the back of the surveys, we then conducted a number of workshops, which allowed us to dig a little bit deeper and understand better what some of those attitudes and sort of where some of the concerns may lie, what questions people had, what they would want to see put in place in order to be happy with the work that we were doing. So that early work really helped us to shape principles which now guide the way that we work. So next slide, please. And again. So we have three main principles, and I'll talk you through those. So first and foremost, public benefit must be at the heart of what we do. So that is really, really important that we keep in mind and keep focused on. Is the potential for patient or public benefit to this research? Next, please. And the second is about alleviating potential public concerns and building trust. So we do that through our ongoing communications, engagement and involvement programme. And again, please. And the final principle that we work by is transparency in data sharing and public oversight in the decisions that we make. So talking openly about the work that we're doing, always being upfront and clear about the way that we're working and the projects that we're working on, and actively involving patients and members of the public in the decisions that we make. Next slide, please. So that brings us on to our Data Trust Committee, which we set up off the back of understanding from that early survey and workshop work what patients felt was necessary in order to have trust in the work that we were doing. And our Data Trust Committee is made up entirely of patients and members of the public. So they are guided by experts in the meetings that they have, but the membership is made up entirely of patients and members of the public. And they review every single data access request that comes through Pioneer. So they are really integral part of our decision-making process. The committee currently has 10 active members, although as we get more requests in and there is more work for them to do, we're actually looking to grow that committee. And just to give you kind of a step-by-step, when a request comes through to Pioneer, there is some initial work that is done to make sure that we have the kind of data that those researchers would need to answer the research questions that they're posing, and due diligence and background checks on the researcher themselves and the credentials of the organisation, for example. And if we kind of get through that point, then a full data request form is shared with the members of the Data Trust Committee. So that's quite a lengthy document which has a lot of information in there about how the researchers are intending to use patient data to answer the questions that they want to answer. How are they intending to do that responsibly and safely, and what they hope that their research will lead to in terms of learning and understanding. And the Data Trust Committee members come together at the moment between fortnightly and monthly to meet and discuss those data requests that come through. We've trained them to do that. There's a training and induction programme for new members, and we've thought really carefully about who is on our Data Trust Committee as well. So equality, diversity and inclusion is really, really important to us, and we're really pleased and proud to say that we have a committee that is very diverse at the moment, and as well as diversity in terms of age ranges, ethnicities, experience kind of with healthcare, so people with long-term health conditions, carers, a whole range of different people we have on board. We've also got some members who've done lots of patient involvement work before, and some who are completely fresh eyes and who are working with us for the first time in this kind of capacity. So we've got a real mixed group, and they're really important to us. They have worked together to devise their own processes and the way that they want to work with us. And they've put in place things like a minimum number of members that need to be present in order for a meeting to be valid, and how many or what percentage of those members present need to vote to approve a data request in order for it to get through, and that is a significant majority. So at the end of every discussion, we give the members of the committee the chance to vote to say whether they approve or do not approve of a data access request. There is another option where they pose questions that they want sent back to the researchers, and so that wouldn't necessarily mean it's an approval or not approval at that stage. There's sort of further steps, but once they've got to a point where they've got all the information they feel is necessary, they then get to vote, and we need 80% of the committee members present to vote for approval to get to the next stage. So they're really, really vital. We don't consider taking a request any further unless we have patient and public backing for that data request. And that means that as a project team, it really keeps us focused on what patient benefit looks like, and what patients and members of the public are comfortable with, what they see as having real potential to make a difference to patients' lives. Next slide, please. So we are really keen for public voices to be heard throughout. So that's not just with our with the requests that come through to us, but then with the work that those researchers will go off and do with Pioneer's data. We believe it's really important to strong research. So we've put in place a number of steps to support our researchers to involve patients and members of the public better. So one of the things that the Data Trust Committee will be looking for in those data requests is whether the researchers have explained how they will be involving patients and members of the public in their research. And we noticed in the early months of working with the committee that they were quite often feeding back that this section could be stronger. So we have taken that feedback on board, and we are looking to put in place sort of support for those researchers. So one of the things that we're doing is building a network of potential patients who could be involved in research, who could be called upon to be involved in different areas. So we're doing that working with the patient groups that are already in place through University Hospitals Birmingham and through the University of Birmingham and the connections that we have there. And also working with local and national charities to build this wider pool of patients that we could signpost to. Next, please. Another way that we are working to support researchers to do their own patient and public involvement and engagement better is that we have developed a best practice document that we are happy to share, so we can kind of offer pointers and give direction on what good patient and public involvement looks like. Next, please. And then to meet academic needs, we're also trialling a drop-in session where I would be available to answer questions about patient and public involvement and engagement. We know this works really well in the academic sector already. So at the University of Birmingham, we have similar drop-in sessions running for University of Birmingham academics across any patient and public involvement kind of queries and any research. But Pioneer specifically, we are looking at setting up new drop-in sessions and trialling those, which would be open to academics from any institution who are looking to use Pioneer data in their work. Next, please. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my slides. I'm going to hand over to Gary Price now, because Gary is a patient or member of the public who's been working with us for a long time. So Gary, we'd really like you to explain a little bit about your experiences working with Pioneer. That would be excellent, thank you.
I think I'm there. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gary Price. I'm a qualified engineer, managing director of a collaborative robot business. I've been involved with the Birmingham Trust for a number of years, helping out on the Centre for Patient Reported Outcome Research with Melanie Calvert. And lastly, over the last, well, since or just before the start of Pioneer, Liz and the team asked me if I could join them and help them develop the patient public involvement side for them, which has been a really, really interesting, eye-opening and very challenging time. As you know, we went through the pandemic last year. We're still in it at the moment, but the big challenge was to bring all this together. And as you can see, everybody's done a fantastic job of delivering really what I believe HDR UK were expecting. Within that, one of the most important parts was obviously the patient participation or patient public participation. And from my experience, it's been a real challenge, really, really interesting. And what we're seeing now is very, very rewarding. We're quite lucky in that we have sort of been thrown in at the deep end. We've had to very much swim very quickly, and within by doing this, we have very quickly put together very robust processes for reviewing the requests that come through. As Laura said, we have a great oh, Ben would like to slide share stopped while Gary speaks. Sorry, I'm reading a little one that's come up. So what we, with Laura, working with Laura, we have defined the people and patients, public and patients, we would like to be involved in this. We're lucky enough to have a fantastic cross-section. We have very few, what I would call serial PPIs in there. We have people from all walks of life. We have people from different backgrounds, and this has really, really given us, or what we feel when we do come to an agreement or a decision on something, it really is in the public interests. For me to reflect on this, I think it's been a fantastic personal achievement. Really proud to be part of this. We still have a lot to do. It's quite dynamic at the moment. We're still refining the way that we work. We are looking at how we can make it more efficient, setting in various flow paths to make this easier, more transparent for our members. So yeah, overall, great satisfaction, and we've all learned a lot from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. That was fantastic, and thank you, Laura, also for talking us through the public oversight. We now come to the Q&A part of the presentation, and we've tried to leave as much time as possible so that you can ask any questions. I can see some questions coming through, which is fantastic. But obviously keep putting them up there, or email Ben on the Pioneer at uhb.nhs.uk website if you don't want to have your name put by them. I hope that doesn't mean the questions will be too difficult, but I've got Susie here to answer the difficult questions, so that will be fine. So may I ask Gary and Laura to put their cameras back on again, and I'm going to chair the questions and then pass them out to the appropriate people to give their insight. So we'll start from the top. So the first two questions. One, this seems to be a regional programme with a national reach. How do you plan to grow your data points and roll out your findings nationally? And the second question, I think, is very much related to that. It also says, could you clarify the geographical coverage of the data sets, and is this likely to be extended? So I'll take those first questions, and then I'll start talking about how we can potentially roll out, and then move to Susie for the practical ways that we would do that. So yes, we are very firmly and very proudly based in the West Midlands, with the population of Birmingham included, but also with the West Midlands Ambulance Service. This covers all of the West Midlands, from Hereford in terms of being southwest, right up to Stoke, so a huge catchment area. We've always wanted to be able to grow, but grow still retaining an important quality base in terms of the data that we provide. Because if the data is of poor quality, the insights that you're likely to gain from them could well be wrong, and that could take us down the wrong direction in terms of patient care. So we started with the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Heartlands, Solihull and Good Hope, and the West Midlands Ambulance Service, and we're now beginning to bring on board some primary care data as well, because what's important to us is to map the entire acute care journey, from people visiting their GP or out of hours services to coming to the hospital, and then what happens to them afterwards. We're not just focused in the West Midlands though. We're very proudly associated with the Society of Acute Medicine, and they have a benchmarking audit that they do at the moment biannually, which looks at all of the patients that come through the front door of hospitals across the country. And that gives us in-reach into 153 national hospitals, in order to look at the depth of data that we have within the West Midlands and then apply that in breadth across the country. But we are interested in expanding, and we're already talking to other hospitals and data providers about how to do that, particularly looking at some women's and children's services, recognising that they might not be as fully represented in other data hubs across the country, and also in data cache, so that their data perhaps isn't being used as much as it should be to improve care. And I'll pass over to Susie to talk about how we onboard other places.
Yep, thanks, Liz. So there's many ways we do that, but clearly, as we've sort of spoke, the learning that we already have and the expertise we have in health data from our team is vast. And what we would do if someone wanted to onboard is we work through with you how we get the data, and we look at the data structure. And our clear learning at the moment is that we've had many other projects. I've sort of worked in healthcare for over 25 years, bringing in data sets both nationally and internationally. So leading that technical team, I bring that expertise there. And as we sort of said very early on, was that Pioneer's always had that aim, the thinking big, but we started with our own hospital, and then we've sort of moved out, because once we get those processes right, I'm sure Gary in engineering will sort of nod for the processes, but making sure that you have those standard processes in place and making sure that's replicable and that actually we have that quality data is really important. And so actually we're very used to handling national data, international data. We've got different algorithms to convert if it's not in English. So there's all of this, the expertise is there. We just need to sort of interact with the various data providers, but also through some of the grants Liz talks about, we're engaging with as the Newcastle data, and also with the COVID, we've had all the sort of UCLH hospital data. So we're already showing that we can handle this data and we can sort of turn that around.
Thank you. So some other questions. Ben has said a couple of questions by email. The first is, if I'm interested in a data set which is not advertised on the gateway, can a bespoke data set be built? Oh, that sounds like one for Susie.
I thought that might come to me. Yes, is the very simple answer, but I'd like to sort of expand on that more. So as Liz said, and when you have the slides, you'll see the breadth of the data sets that we advertise, but they are really only a sort of small proportion of what we're able to do. So please do get in touch. And as I say, even with those data sets, if you're interested in COVID data or emergency care data sort of presentation at an emergency department, there's still a lot of specialist tweaking that we will do. So we will very much make it bespoke to you. And that is actually part of what the remit we would need to do anyway under our sort of national laws, that we have to make sure we only share what's actually appropriate for that question. So, but very much we can build bespoke data sets and also work with you on that.
Thank you. So have you declined any data requests so far, and what might make you do so? I'm going to start by talking about some data requests that we haven't been able to furnish, and then I'm going to pass to Gary and Laura about the things that they look for from a patient and public oversight view that might make them want to support or not support a data request. So we have declined some data requests. Some have been for the very simple reason that it's a request for data that we don't hold. So for example, we had a request for some physiotherapy related data that at the time we didn't hold. And the second best thing to a yes is a fast no, I think. So we were able to turn that around very quickly and say, I'm so sorry, this data isn't within Pioneer, but we're able to signpost to national societies where that data might be held. We've also declined a data request that we didn't feel was necessarily in the patient's interest, in discussion with our Data Trust Committee and also with Hdr UK. And that was a request we had from an American insurance company that wanted to understand more about the healthcare needs of patients with multimorbidity. But they were very open about the fact that they thought they were undercharging for insurance policies for people with multimorbidity, and they were looking to use that data to try and push up the prices. And sharing data with insurance companies is something that I think we would all struggle with. And that was a very, very easy, I think, no for us, because we very clearly couldn't see any patient benefit in helping with that request. But again, we discussed it with our Data Trust Committee. So I'll pass over to maybe Gary first to talk about what he looks for personally when he's reviewing a data request to see what might make him say no.
First and foremost is if it's in the public interest. Will this benefit the public short, medium, long term? The second one then is for me to understand the people who are requesting it. Are they working with the public within the project that they're working on? Do they involve the public, and how do they involve the people in that? The other thing then we look at, or for me I look at, is the background of the people who are wanting to do this research, and to just get a feel really for is it sustainable as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, would you like to add to that at all?
Yeah, I can pick up there. So one of the things that we often talk about within the Data Trust Committee, and lots of the members will have questions for our expert team who join those meetings, is around whether there is any risk of that data that we're sharing becoming identifiable. So that's something that I know members of the public are really keen to be sure that the data is truly anonymised and that their privacy is protected. So if requesters are asking for age data, for example, our committee are always quite hot on, well, they don't want date of birth, do they? And what kind of age data are they looking at? If they're looking at the older end of the population, for example, are they looking for information broken down by year? So how many 100-year-olds we've got, how many 101-year-olds, how many 102-year-olds? And obviously, as you get to sort of that end of the age range, there are fewer patients with a particular condition that they might be asking for data around. So the committee are always looking for, is there any chance that this could be identified? And they ask a lot of questions of that. Of course, the Pioneer team are also really hot on making sure that this isn't possible. So usually, rather than sending questions back to requesters, they would be able to reassure by saying, we're not going to share it like that. We would always bracket and put things into buckets. So we would look at people over the age of 90, for example. So that means that there's a much larger sample of data there, and there isn't chance of any one person being identified within that. But I know that's something that the Data Trust Committee are always really keen to be sure of, and they really grill our experts in those meetings to make sure that every possibility and eventuality has been thought of, and if there is any concern or area that we're not sure about, then those questions would always go back to the requesters to make sure that the researchers who want the data themselves are really clear about how they're going to protect patients' anonymity and ensure privacy of their data. So that's one of the things that we often talk about. And then Gary touched upon looking at how patients will be involved in the researchers' projects themselves. And again, that's a conversation that comes up regularly, and our committee are not just looking for the requester to say, yes, we will be involving members of the public, but they actually look for a little bit of detail there so that the researchers have already thought about how they will be involving members of the public, which members of the public are they going to be involving, not by person, but have they identified groups that they may go and speak to, and at what stages in their research project would they talk to them? Are they engaging with those patients throughout? Those kind of things are things that I know that the Data Trust Committee are really keen to see in applications coming through.
Thank you. And just to pick up on that point, obviously for some researchers, perhaps those that work with patient groups or work within a healthcare setting, being able to talk to patients about their lived experience of disease to help shape the kind of research questions and projects is easy, sometimes even second nature. And I think all of those of us with an academic hat on would recognise that public and patient engagement and involvement is incredibly important now with applications. But for some people, it's a really new thing that they haven't thought about before. And so often we first get a data request form coming in where it says, have you involved patients? And it says, no. And we were able then to start a conversation about, well, if not, why not? And other ways that we could help facilitate that. And with Pioneer being based within a thriving healthcare community, we can usually signpost people to relevant groups to begin those conversations. And most of the researchers that have engaged with that have come back to us saying how much it's improved their application, because they're suddenly thinking about it from a different angle. We would argue the more relevant angle, the angle which is the patient that will be using their innovation or hopefully benefiting from the research that's done. So the next question, is it possible to share an example of a successful application to help applicants understand what is needed? And well, most people that put in a data request form do so as part of a research program that they're working on. And so obviously we would need to have permissions to share that publicly. But that question has got me thinking about maybe we need to do some mock-up data request forms about the kind of requests that we could have and the kind of requests that might fail a data trust review to try and help applicants. So I think that's an action point for us from this seminar.
Yeah,
that
one of those
forward.
sort of the red cross and the green tick of what to put. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that question, because that's something that we'll act on, because I think that will help us and help people requesting data from us. So we've had two more questions that Ben's put in from email. And these look like Susie questions to me. And what data models can you supply is the first question.
Okay, so we try and be as flexible as possible. So that's the first thing to say. But in terms of the actual data that we extract currently, it's our local system. So it's a very local model. But actually what that is done is we've used all the standard coding for the disease and procedures. So everything is mapped to what is a normal standard process. And then depending on how you want that data, we can put that in any format needed. So we can put that into tables, SQL, we can put Excel, depending on the export size.
Thank you. And the next question is, what kind of tooling and computing power can your TREs manage?
Thank you. And I just realised I didn't also touch on OMOP, which I did touch on in my talk, but the OMOP is our international standard. So we also have data in that format as well. So there's two different formats, but tooling for computer power. Okay, so computing power, hopefully again from the talk you'll have seen that we've thought big. So there is, and our work with Microsoft has certainly enabled us to realise big. I won't reveal the number of credits we're burning, but it's a very, very powerful compute. But we can literally, it is however big you need it, however many cores, however many machines, however many users, there is no limit. Of course, that we have to cost that up, and there has to be a charge. So, you know, that is normally the limiting factor is around the budget of the person applying for the license, but there is no limit. We've purposely built that to be as expandable as possible, but also taking it the other way. Actually, what we do is we advise you around what is actually necessary, so you can keep the sort of burn rate relatively low, but still get the actual tools and everything you need. So in terms of tools, pretty much anything that is out there that data scientists, statisticians, academics need. So for example, if you just want SQL, if you want the Microsoft toolings, Stata, SPSS, we've got the sort of Power BIs, and then from the data science, we've got the sort of Jupyter, R, Python, all of anything you might expect, we offer it, and we will work through with you to say what is it you need, and then we'll come up with a price for that.
Lovely. And I've just been reminded to say to you all that if you'd like further information on our work within Pioneer, our next quarterly newsletter will be out later this month. And if you want to be on the newsletter feed to be updated on Pioneer's work, the new data sets we hold, the projects we're supporting, then sign up at www.pioneerdatahub.co.uk. So another question for Susie, do you have models for TREs, or can I have one built to my specification?
So we can build it. So we have various standard models, and we have a sort of bronze, silver, gold offering. But then, yes, if you have an absolute bespoke model that you want us to look at, then very happy to look at that and work that through with you.
Thank you. So the next two questions that are on there are, can you give me, I'll do a Susie question first, and then I'll take one. Can you give an example, lots of Susie questions, can you give an example of assistance you provide for analytics?
Oh, an example, there's many, but so as I say, the Pioneer team is built up and sits within a larger informatics department, but the Pioneer team has a very broad range of experience, from industry experience, working in industry data science, working in academic data science. They've all got experience of data analytics and healthcare data. But so where do we help? Well, we have a lot of postdocs, so we've got some very good expertise, but actually quite broad. So we've got right through from an economist through to a sort of biologist. We've got all of the sort of clinical support as well to make sure that we get that right on the academic side. But, you know, if someone wants us to run the analytics, and we can do very advanced analytics through to sort of AI, NLP work, or we can actually just sit alongside and provide some consultancy if you're sort of new to health data and just, you might be a very advanced statistician, but you just don't understand our data. So we can just talk you through the data, make sure it's sort of coming out with what you expect. So everything from entry level through to postdoc, high advanced machine learning is the answer.
Yes, there was me thinking Python was a kind of snake. I've learnt an entirely different language being part of this. So a related question, and I know there's some others we need to go back to, but can you give examples of the consultancy you offer? So I'll start that in terms of the types of consultancy. So Pioneer really benefits from being based within a healthcare and academic environment, meaning that we have the full range of gamut of people that can help with projects depending on need. That can run from consultancy in terms of clinical input. So you might want to have a medical consultant looking over the question or the data fields to make sure that you're gaining the data that you need, and that the question you're asking has relevance in today's practice in terms of medicine, or to help you identify holes in the evidence base, so that you can work together collaboratively. And sometimes this is a pure consultancy relationship, but often it becomes a collaboration where people start to work and build and expand on a simple question into a series of questions that need to be answered. The clinical consultancy that we offer isn't just from medical doctors like myself. It can also be from nurses, pharmacists, allied healthcare professionals as well, who all have their unique take on how healthcare can be improved through their experience of delivering healthcare. But of course, the patient voice is really important in this as well. And I've spoken about how we can support data requesters in understanding more about the lived experience of having a condition, or working through a hospital process, or through a new piece of technology to improve their healthcare. There's no point in designing a brilliant answer to a question that no patient is interested in, or providing a piece of technology that nobody can actually use in the real world. And so that kind of real world usability and testing is really important. But being based within an academic centre, we also have the expertise of our clinical trials units, and also the development of new diagnostic technologies through the academic and NHS partnerships that run throughout Birmingham. So that can help with how you design a clinical study, how you do a feasibility study, how do you test a new device or piece of equipment. And we also have a Centre for Regulatory Science looking at how you gain regulatory approvals for taking your idea and putting it through that pipeline that finally enables it to be used to help patients. So these are not expertise that are all held within Pioneer specifically, but they form part of the community that we work within. And we've been really proud to be able to bring that kind of consultancy in order to help patients. So the kind of consultancy is incredibly broad. There's a question, do you charge for data access? And a related one, which is, do you have any ballpark estimate of cost of access to data, realizing that this will be very based on the project? The first answer is yes, of course, we do charge for licensed access to data. And that is because the amount of effort that it takes to bring this data together, to ensure that it's of the correct quality, to ensure that it's linked across healthcare providers, to store that data securely in a way that our patients would expect, and then to cut the data to answer a specific question and place it within a trusted research environment, to bring that consultancy on board, all cost time and money. And most of the people that are working within Pioneer are, like myself, also practicing clinicians, or working within the health informatics team of the hospital. So the people that we're working with in order to provide this data under license are real experts in their field that work with this data, work with patients, and our patients as part of their living experience and their jobs. So we need to recoup those costs in order to keep going. But we make sure that when we're answering a question, it's never about the money that's being brought in or how we recoup those costs. That North Star of patient benefit is the most important thing. So this is not a commercial enterprise. This is something that we're doing to improve patient care, and the charging for data access enables us to keep going forward and to think of better and innovative ways to engage with the public and patients, make sure we're reflecting what they think is important, and to improve patient care through secure, safe, robust access to patient data. Another question, so can we come up with a ballpark figure? I sort of forgot the second part of that. It's really difficult based on that, because some people want a very simple question answering that requires very little data. And some people want a really complex piece of work that includes complicated data, lots of patient and public involvement, lots of consultancy, and that of course brings things up into a very, very different ballpark. So we work with people that are interested in accessing data. And the way we've done it with some people that don't have funds to begin with is to look at grant applications or those sorts of models of funding, which allow us to work with you to make sure that those recouped costs are built in from the beginning of the project so that we can move forward as quickly as possible. How do you ensure public oversight reflects the views of most people? I think that's going to be a question for Laura, and then to Gary to give his oversight as well.
I thought it would be, thanks Liz. So We work with our Data Trust Committee, as I explained previously, and that committee is made up of 10 to 12 members. So with a small group like that, it's impossible to be truly representative of the exact makeup of the population, but we can work hard to be reflective of the population. And we did some work quite early on when we were forming the Data Trust Committee to understand the demographics in Birmingham, so the patient population whose data is actually being made use of in Pioneer. And from understanding who made up our local community, we devised an ideal makeup of our Data Trust Committee, and we have recruited to the committee in rounds. So that's allowed us to bring people on board, see how they work together, see how they gel as a group, understand what gaps we might have in the demographics of our group, for example, as well as the skills and expertise, and then go out again and look a little bit more specifically for certain people to join our committee. So we did a second round of recruitment just at the turn of the year, and with that recruitment we were much more targeted. In fact, we were really specific in who we were looking to join the group. So we knew that we needed more South Asian members because the South Asian community within Birmingham is quite large. We knew that we didn't have anybody on our committee who represented the LGBTQ community. We didn't have enough young people, so we were really targeted, and we outlined who we were looking for, and then we placed adverts in places where we thought those communities would be looking. So for example, we went to local schools and sixth forms. We made use of the Young People's Advisory Group through Birmingham Children's Hospital, and we got in applications, a whole range of applications, but specifically from those community groups. And then we followed our usual selection process. So we took names and identifiable details off, and we just looked at how people had answered the questions. And then when we recruit, we have a short and informal chat with anybody looking to join the committee to explain more about what the role looks like, what the commitment looks like, check they're still interested, and to learn a little bit more about them and their motivations. So at that point we would be kind of following our usual process, but we knew that we'd got applications in from groups that meant that overall we would have that diversity within our Data Trust Committee. So it's really important to us, and it's something that we work really hard to ensure that even as the group evolves and changes over time, because members have certain terms and also like lengths of commitment, I suppose is what I mean by that, but also things will come up and people may find that they can't work with us any longer, and we will look to replace. So our group will change over time, and that's a good thing. But as we change and grow and evolve, we will always kind of keep that idea of what our ideal makeup would look like, and we'd be looking to make sure that we're as close to that as possible. And as hopefully Pioneer moves forwards and brings in data from around the rest of the country, then we too will look at bringing on board new members of the Data Trust Committee, so that we are still reflective of that wider population, and that we've got voices from other parts of the UK as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Gary, I don't know if you've got anything to add in terms of your experience and working with such a diverse group of people as we have in our Data Trust Committee.
It's taken a bit longer than me and Laura expected to get the team. We started with quite a small team, but that sort of long-term view of how it should look and the people who should be included in it, I think really pays off, because people can look at that group now and the backgrounds of the people and see that we really have got a good cross-section of society. And as Laura says, as we roll out this and we expand our horizons, then yeah, we will also change that profile as we move forward to suit and to reflect the greater population.
Thank you, thank you. So we're out of time now, and it just leaves me to wrap up. So if we could have the slides back up again, please. First of all, I wanted to thank all of the people listening to this webinar for the questions that they've submitted. They've done an amazing job of really pushing us with lots of questions, so we're very grateful for those. And I just wanted to finish in the last couple of moments of the webinar to talk about why people might want to work with Pioneer. And I think we all recognise, and actually maybe the pandemic has made us recognise more than ever, that research and innovation by NHS academics and commercial partners are absolutely crucial in the development and smart deployment of health and care treatments, technologies and processes. Essentially, healthcare is a huge challenge, and the only way we can crack it is by being as intelligent as we can be and working together to answer the questions that really matter to patients. And Pioneer can assist to help answer those questions through our high quality data, state-of-the-art infrastructure, and the expertise that's offered across the programme. And feedback from researchers that have worked with us so far have told us the reasons why they've worked with us initially, and now we're beginning to see researchers come back again with different questions to be answered. And some of that is about the data uniqueness and its diversity, the fact that we benefit from coming from such a diverse population, the fact that we're not just dealing with one condition or one set of conditions affecting a single organ, but that really we can provide that real breadth of data that is reflective of humans in all our complexity. The fact that our data access processes are ethically approved and have public oversight. Initially, some people that we worked with were a little bit unsure about this data trust committee concept. They thought that it might block access to data and it might prevent us from sharing data with people, even if their intentions were to answer important questions. But in fact, that patient and public oversight has enabled us to be maybe bolder, because when we're unsure about whether data access is reflective of what a group of patients might need or want, we're able to then reach out to different communities to ask them directly. So when we were looking at the effect of ethnicity and its impact with COVID, we went out to various communities to ask them if they'd be happy for their ethnicity data to be used in this way. And we're empowered by the resounding yes we got, because we were answering a question that really affected their healthcare. Working with UHB, we have global leaders, and we're very proud to work with world-class partners such as Insono and Microsoft with our infrastructure. Our data platform is something that we're very proud of because of its cutting-edge design, its flexibility, and the feedback we've had from people using it has reflected that. And as Susie's spoken to, we have years of practical experience working with health data and can respond very agilely, as we did with the COVID crisis. And I hope we've shown you that our responsiveness and turnaround times are relatively short within this field, particularly if we know that it's going to be a no. We try and tell people that as quickly as we can, but then signpost what we can do or where else they might go. And all of that, I hope, has led to us being a place where people would want to come and work with, and patients could feel proud that their data was part of. And we obviously honour the national data opt-out, but we also have a Pioneer specific one if people are concerned. But when we have conversations with patients, overwhelmingly the discussions are not about how do I opt out, but how can I get more involved with this process so I can really see the benefits that are coming from sharing health data. And I hope that that's something that you'll take away from this. So we are out of time, 1 minute to go, and it just leaves it to me to thank everybody for joining us on this webinar, to thank the panel members that joined me, including Gary, Laura and Susie, and wish you all a very good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.